Well, good afternoon. I would like, first of all, to tell you how very honored I am to be invited to this event. I have admired the Baha'i religion and the bravery of individual Baha'i, both those of you who have been forced to become refugees, those of you who have been tortured, those who still live in very insecure conditions in Iran. I remember in 1982 or 3 an advertisement in the Toronto Globe and Mail, a picture of 8 Iranian women, Baha'i women, who had been executed, a physicist, a violinist, a housewife, and some others. And I remember, a girl I met when I taught at McMaster University who told me that when the revolution started at the age of 7, she was in boarding school in Iran, and how she had not seen her parents for 7 years, from the age of 7, sorry, she was in India. From the age of 7 to 14, she stayed in India under the care of her older brother, and her parents were in Iran. Eventually they were reunited. You know a lot more of these stories than I do, but they continue, as you can hear, to move me. You may wish to know that you are sitting in the Isabel Bader Theater. Bader, a philanthropist and scientist, was a refugee from Nazi Germany. I have some understanding of what you are going through or have gone through because I am the daughter of a refugee from the Nazis. This morning, I'm also a scholar of comparative genocide, and this morning's discussion was very familiar to me. Talk of the desecration of graves, conspiracy theories, the super-sexualization of the Baha'i, accusations that through their so-called cult, they are stealing children. These are all characteristics of extremely rights-abusive, if not genocidal, regimes. These are the kinds of otherings that many people experience, but especially, I think, Baha'is and German Jews for having been highly educated, urban, secular, professional people. The Jews were disproportionately highly educated and so on, and so I understand our Iranian Baha'i. I thank Reza for quoting me. This is very courteous. I wish all my colleagues would be so courteous. So he presents an analysis with which obviously I agree, that there is a disjuncture between traditional and modern modes of living, but this disjuncture is also manipulated by political leaders. Equality of women, for example, equality of status, is not characteristic of any pre-modern society. Hence, women are often seen as the most direct challenges to states that purport to represent traditional culture in the form of the particular kind of Islam which the current and past leaderships of Iran claim is Islam pure and simple. Women as carriers of culture, as symbols of traditional cultures, have to conform to traditional roles even when men no longer have to. So in sociological terms, women have to conform to the status they're born with, their ascribed status, whereas men can enjoy their achieved status out in the world. Modern universalistic religions such as Baha'i, which are particularly, although not only attractive to educated people, are a similar threat, as is the modern secular and rights-protecting society. Here there is a politics of resentment not only against the West, but against a perceived elite and secular group that enjoys upper middle-class privileges. I complimented Reza on a superb phrase he used, the revenge of the aggrieved, but then he told me that it was actually a phrase from the German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt. But in this sense, it applied as it applied to the privileged or allegedly privileged Jewish group in Germany, who were disproportionately, in Germany, not in Poland and other places perhaps, but disproportionately represented in the professions, in the universities, and so on. Somebody earlier said he'd been delivered by a non-Muslim doctor. Many Germans were delivered by Jewish doctors, but that did not stop Nazism. Again, however, this is a political phenomenon caused by a regime and its manipulation of traditional beliefs. It is not something that simply exists among the people. I wondered, however, when I read both Reza and Nazila's papers, which I'm commenting on now, if we are avoiding another key aspect of this, which is the material interests, both of the members of the ruling apparatus and of some private citizens. There are allegations of corruption among the state elite in Iran, as in everywhere else, not only material, but moral. I have to ask whether, in the privacy of their own homes, the people who run Iran now don't drink. I have to ask, in their privacy of their own homes, do they exploit women? Every other allegedly puritanical political movement has been characterized by the most extreme hypocrisy. We know now that Mao Zedong was a serial rapist of young women, girls whom he had presented to him as he traveled out through China. We know that Kim Jong-il of North Korea imports food, has his own French chef, imports so-called dancing girls, brings them into his house. And we have to ask about the material interests of private citizens. Who took the homes that the Baha'i have been forced to leave? Who has taken your furniture and your silverware and your carpets and your family memorabilia? Who took the place in medical school that a Baha'i student was forced to relinquish? People forget, analysts forget, that pure and simple greediness and material interest is one of the major supports for genocide and prejudice against minority groups. No, fix this, yeah. Sorry if my voice isn't being good here. Reza stated in his paper that this is not genocide, but in the 1980s and 90s, genocide scholars such as I were worried that you would experience genocide. You were certainly in those of you who are Baha'i, in a pre-genocidal situation. The various measures taken against Baha'i resembled those and still resemble those taken against German Jews in the 1930s. As with Baha'i, Reza says Baha'i were not a threat to and are not a threat to the Iranian state. Neither were Jews to the German state, except in the imagination of the Nazis. So the fact that Baha'i did not and do not threaten the Iranian state is not enough to protect them, I am sorry to say, from extermination. Perhaps the international concern and the international mechanisms for protection, non-governmental organizations, United Nations human rights committees, and so on, that Nazila has mentioned, partially explain the Baha'i escape, in quotation marks, from genocide, and their suffering merely, again in quotation marks, from economic and political persecutions, selected imprisonment, executions, and forced emigration. I must say I was horrified again by the talk this morning about the campaign to declare Baha'i a cult. I think that is a very dangerous thing to happen. So the title of this session had the word human rights as particularistic. But human rights cannot be particularistic. In law and principle, they are universal. Their origins are not only in the West. In fact, Iran was one of the countries that sat on the committee that drafted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Insofar as human rights are Western, they are not an ideology. They are products not only of philosophy, but also of history, especially, as Reza said, of the development of bureaucratic states and market economies. Cultural relativism, the so-called defense of the so-called rest against the West, is a philosophy that may refer to traditional cultural elements, such as women's inferior status, but is also used by governments to protect their material and other interests in persecuting minorities and maintaining themselves in power. Human rights, as Reza said, are rooted in secularism and the privatization of religion, in liberalism and modernity, in the individualization of culture, in making culture and religion a private choice. Without that universality, they are not rights. They are privileges that any government can curb or withdraw. Nazila has shown how groups suffering rights abuses are often obliged to draw on international allies. And she mentions in her paper the boomerang effect, where people who are suffering appeal to international allies, who then appeal to their own governments and international agencies, who then pressure the abusive government. Unfortunately, this is not working on the current Iranian regime. The opening under Khatami was closed some time ago, as the events of the Green Revolution show. Yet, as Reza says, there is room for hope in the suppressed desire for human rights. He mentions that the youth of Iran today, and this is partly through globalization and the fact that it is very hard for governments now to close down communications among countries or societies, the youth today are more secular, more modern, more empathetic. And they have put a higher value on autonomy, individuality, and empathy. Reza has coined, I think, a brilliant phrase, intra-generational empathy. That is, within this generation, empathy by, for example, Muslim youth to non-Muslim youth. And he mentions they cross the class and cultural divide, and indeed may also cross the gender lines, so that you have intra-generational gender empathy as well. He also mentions the desire for an ordinary secular life. During the opening in Eastern Europe, many dissidents used the term normal. They just wanted a normal life. You get up in the morning, you worry about your kids, who are they going to marry? They're going to marry the person you don't want them to marry. I'm trying to sell my son, that's why I mentioned this. He's self-supporting and good-looking. Anyway, but you get a normal life is you get up, you worry about your family, you worry about your job, you worry about illness. But you don't worry that the police are going to come and arrest you. You do not worry that although you obey the laws, you mind your own business and you don't hurt anybody, they are going to throw you in jail. And that is what Eastern European dissidents wanted. They wanted a normal life. The change in the youth of Iran, as Reza describes, I have no independent evidence, but I believe him, includes the kind of rights-respecting culture that Nazila also talks about. I just want to close, because I am a human rights scholar, by saying what you already know, but perhaps it's nice to hear an outsider say it. Human rights in law and in philosophy are universal. All Europeans, all human beings should enjoy, must enjoy all human rights. All human beings have the right to freedom of worship, including apostasy, heresy, and atheism. All human beings have the right not to be tortured, not to be disappeared, not to be executed, and not to be forced to migrate. These practices are wrong and intolerable, regardless of who performs them. There is no other in international human rights law. We are all human. Thank you.